In February 2022, the world woke up to images of tanks rolling across borders, air raid sirens screaming through Ukrainian cities, and political leaders rushing to microphones to declare history in the making. The story seemed simple. Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine is the victim. The West must respond. But wars are never born overnight. Behind every missile strike is a decade of politics. Behind every headline is a history rarely explained. And behind every moral narrative is a web of power, fear, strategy, and survival. This documentary does not seek to justify violence. It seeks to explain what the headlines often simplify. Because to understand the Russia-Ukraine war, you must understand NATO, post-Cold War power shifts, broken agreements, and why Russia sees this conflict not as aggression, but as existential defense. This is what the media isn't explaining. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. To the West, this was a victory for democracy and capitalism. To Russia, it was a geopolitical catastrophe. Suddenly, a superpower lost 14 republics, half of its population, strategic depth against Europe, its ideological identity. NATO, originally formed in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union, now faced a question. If the Soviet Union no longer exists, why does NATO still need to expand? During German reunification talks in 1990, Western leaders allegedly assured Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would move not 1 inch eastward. While this promise was never written into a formal treaty, it was repeatedly mentioned in diplomatic discussions. From Russia's perspective, that understanding was later violated. Between 1999 and 2020, NATO expanded eastward. Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, and others. Each expansion brought NATO military infrastructure closer to Russian borders. To the West, this was defensive cooperation. To Russia, it looked like strategic encirclement. NATO presents itself as a defensive alliance. Its official doctrine says it does not seek confrontation. But from Moscow's perspective, NATO has been involved in Yugoslavia, 1999, Afghanistan, 2001, Libya, 2011. These interventions happened without UN Security Council approval or with interpretations Russia considered illegitimate. For Russian policymakers, the message was clear. NATO acts militarily when it wants to, and Russia has little power to stop it. Ukraine, in this context, became the red line. Ukraine is not just another country to Russia. It is a historical cradle of Russian civilization, Kievan Rus, a major transit route for gas pipelines, a buffer between Russia and NATO, home to millions of Russian-speaking citizens. When Ukraine began moving closer to NATO and the EU after 2014, Russia viewed it not as Ukraine choosing freedom, but as a strategic threat at its doorstep. In 2014, Ukraine's pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych was ousted after mass protests known as the Maidan Revolution. Western media described it as a democratic uprising. Russia viewed it as a Western-backed regime change, a violation of Ukraine's political neutrality, a direct threat to Russian interests. Shortly after, Russia annexed Crimea, a move condemned internationally but supported by many Russian-speaking residents there. At the same time, conflict erupted in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass region, between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists. From 2014 to 2022, over 14,000 people died, multiple ceasefires failed, the Minsk agreements collapsed. Ukraine increased military cooperation with NATO. This was not a frozen conflict. It was a slow-burning fuse. By late 2021, Russia demanded a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, withdrawal of NATO forces from Eastern Europe, recognition of Russian security concerns. The West rejected these demands, stating that NATO membership is a sovereign choice, and that Russia has no veto power over another country's future. Diplomacy stalled. Troops amassed. Warnings were issued. Then, on February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The world reacted with outrage. Sanctions followed. Weapons flowed into Ukraine, and a regional conflict became a global geopolitical confrontation. Modern war is fought on two fronts: the battlefield, the information space. Western media largely framed the war as democracy versus tyranny, good versus evil, freedom versus aggression. Russian media framed it as defense against NATO expansion, protection of Russian speakers, resistance to Western imperialism. Both sides engaged in selective storytelling. Civilian suffering became a symbol, but rarely a full picture. What often goes unmentioned? NATO's role in escalating tensions, the economic motivations behind prolonged conflict, the voices of Ukrainians caught between both powers. Truth became fragmented, filtered, and politicized. While Ukraine burns, others gain. 1. Arms manufacturers. Defense contractors across the US and Europe record historic profits. 2. Energy powers. Europe shifts energy dependence, opening new markets. 3. Political leverage. The war reshapes global alliances, pushing countries to pick sides. 4. Strategic weakening. Russia is economically pressured. Europe becomes more dependent on U.S. security guarantees. The cost? Ukrainian lives, global food insecurity, rising inflation worldwide, a new era of militarization. What is often missing from mainstream coverage? The role of historical grievances, the failure of diplomacy, the shared responsibility of global powers, the human cost beyond slogans. This does not justify invasion. It explains why it happened. Understanding is not endorsement. The Russia-Ukraine war is not a movie with heroes and villains. It is a collision of history, fear, power, pride, broken trust. Until the world is willing to confront the deeper causes, not just the symptoms, peace will remain fragile. And the question remains, is this war really about Ukraine or about the future of global power itself? Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you.